Hello, I'm Stuart Bowes, and you're watching or listening to the Net Hero podcast. This is a podcast for you if you care about what we're doing to the planet. You don't have to be an eco-warrior. We believe business is the solution to making things better. But we're for people who want to make that difference by either cutting their emissions or coming up with ideas that can help us do things a bit better. We've featured politicians, academics, lots and lots of business people, entrepreneurs, inventors, and of course people who are just interested in doing the right thing. So sit back, listen and enjoy, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Please share it with your friends and colleagues, and you can always check out our two websites that cover all of this, Energy Live News and futurenetzero.com. This podcast is purely editorial, so sit back and enjoy this week's episode. Now, I was sporty once. I know you're laughing, you're pissing yourselves, but it's true. Right now, I've blown my Achilles, so I'm definitely doing nothing. But sportswear is something that when I grew up, people did for sport. So I remember trainers being something you just wore. We had plimsolls for PE, and tracksuits started coming in the 70s, but it was only for people who were athletes. Then it changed, and sportswear became our wear. We wear it all the time. Doesn't matter where you go around the world, people are wearing either football shirts or trainers, t-shirts, sweatpants, you name it, they're wearing it. Sport is also a vital part of kind of our culture. We follow what icons do. Michael Jordan's little drop, everyone knows it. People look at the swoosh of Nike. There's loads of logos that people know, and it affects how particularly the young look at things, because sport is now intrinsically fashion. But is it doing enough to clean up its act? Well, today's guest on the Net Hero podcast is a man who's trying to do something about that. He's trying to take the footprint of sports clothing and diminish it. Welcome, Rory MacFadyen, who is the co-founder, I think, is that right? Co-founder of Reflo?
That's correct.
So there is someone else, not just you.
Indeed, yeah. It's actually myself, my best friend from school. So yeah. All part of the story of how Reflo was founded. But yeah, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be on.
No, pleasure. So just explain what Reflo is very briefly so the audience gets it.
Sure. So Reflo is a sustainable apparel brand. So we make sports clothing designing to be moved in, be that your casual sports enthusiast who wants to buy something to go to the gym in or play golf in, all the way through to elite sportsmen. Harry Kane is one of our lead investors. We make football kit for elite sports organizations. Can't say who they are right now, but we're just working with two football clubs, for example, making all their sports kit. But for us, it's quite simple. Our North Star metric is sustainability, and our aim is to be the most sustainable apparel brand in the world. So every decision we make is driven by that.
Right, I can see behind you, you're a bit of a sports enthusiast. There's enough things there, enough football shirts and whatever up there. So are you a sports person by background? What's your background then?
My background's I've worked in the sports industry for a long while. So I worked in the sports and entertainment industry, mainly around football sponsorship, football events, and things like that. I led Saudi Telecom STC sponsorship portfolio for kind of 5 years over in the Middle East.
But you're not a sportsman?
Not a sportsman myself, no. Well, I did play sport, and I still play sport, but never professionally. I mean, I played cricket to a relatively high level, and I think my dad was hoping I was going to play for Sussex one day, but no, it was never at a pro level. But I love sport, playing, watching, being around it. It's my life, really.
We'll talk about what you're doing, but let's talk about sport in general. You see so many things about sport, right? There was an old adage, you go back to the 60s, Black Power in the Olympics, you look at what sport means to people, how it can bring people together, how it can tear people apart. But also sport being something that, even if you don't do it, you can engage with it. Let's break down why sport matters in your mind when it comes to messaging.
For sure. And I think that's, I intrinsically believe as a sports fan, as somebody who plays sports and as someone who's worked in sport, that sport ultimately has a power for good and can do a lot more than most things can. And I think for that exact reason is that sport can be quite tribal, but it is something that people really feel attached to. You don't have to be the best sportsmen in the world to support your local football team. And I think around the world, it doesn't matter where you are,
Yeah,
whether you're in Saudi Arabia or whether you're in the UK, you're generally brought up, and because sport is quite tribal, you follow a team and you feel something, more than just a close affiliation. You feel like you're part of that team, and that tribal nature really brings people into that. And I think, that's incredible as something that can bring people together, but also means that people kind of follow it more than you would follow
yeah,
most things.
yeah,
And
yeah,
people are
definitely.
really dialed into the storytelling and the nuances. And I think that's the brilliant thing about sport, is that it's embedded, it's flooded with brilliant stories. Be it not just about the team, but about the individual. And people really get engaged in that, and rightfully so. It is. Even with the commercialization of sport, if you take that out, sport
Yeah.
fundamentally is something that is community driven. That is something that has grown up with people, and people feel a part of.
And there are so many different ones, right? We know the global ones, but there are some weird little sports out there that have got massive followings. We've got people who are doing things that even aren't considered sport, but it's all part of that sport thing. Esports is one of those things, right, that's happened. I'm a lot older than you, so I said earlier on that, I remember kits being something you only wore, right? So you went to
Mhm.
school and then you could change into your kit, and that was it. And then it started to shift. Now, you probably have to look in your history books, but when did you start to see, because clearly you've been in the sports while for your career, but when did you start to feel, maybe when you were a kid or maybe in your father's generation, that sport had a bigger say, right? So it started to come into fashion. It started to come into, you know, people listening to sports people, all of that. Whereas it used to be very, very, this is sport, this is the rest of the world. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, I think sport is now definitely part of popular culture,
Yeah.
and uh, popular culture drives sport, and sport drives popular culture. I think the two are very much hand in hand. For as long as I can remember, that's probably been the case. It's become more and more so over a period of time. I think you probably would have to go back to my dad's generation, and where actually that probably wasn't. My dad played rugby for Wasps, for example, and I think it wasn't
Well,
at a
he was an
stage. It was
amateur
even
then. Yeah, definitely.
Exactly. It was an
Yeah.
amateur. It was an amateur. I've still got his
Mhm.
old jerseys. There's no sponsors logos on them. It's a
No.
cotton old oversized rugby jersey, and and that's when the game wasn't commercialized. Especially rugby has taken a long time to catch up. But
Yeah.
I think over a period of time, and definitely before my lifetime, I've grown up with that. I've got
Yeah.
Matt
Cool.
Letizier's jersey on my wall, and for
Yeah.
me, that jersey is sacrosanct. That's something that is. I grew up watching him play in that, and that's for me something which it was kind of part of my life growing up. So yeah, I think you'd have to go from before my time. I think probably as sport started to turn pro, in the kind of 60s, 70s, and 80s, depending on which sport it is.
Yeah.
You'd probably say in that commercialization, and I think as media has grown as well, media is a key part of that. As
Cool.
distribution, as it's become a lot easier to watch sport and watch a lot of different sports. And even now, we mentioned that you've got the big sports like football, which you can turn your telly on and it's there. But the smaller sports are living in that kind of cool moment now where they're able to get reach they never were through
Yeah.
social media, through YouTube. They can own their broadcast and their distribution. And that means that there's more of a level playing field, and more sport in its various guises is becoming more embedded. And you look at Baller League that's just started, which is a
Yeah.
completely
Yeah.
new form of football, but it is completely born out of street football, out of popular culture. So yeah, I think it's only moving in that direction, but I think it's always been moving in that direction as long as I can remember.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the thing about sport is that, as I said, it started, and I'm sure you've read it. I've read a really brilliant book by Phil Knight, who founded Nike, right, and what he did,
Yeah,
and the story. If people haven't read it, it's well worth it because he was an athlete, wasn't a brilliant athlete, and then he realized that people needed shoes that kind of were better, but he got them from I think it was Japan. I can't remember where it was or time. I can't remember, but he started importing them. That change that happened in the 70s and 80s um, started to do something which is negative, which is people started to see sport like fashion. And so they're all guilty of it now. Bloody hell, are they guilty of it? Every year there's a new football kit, or there's a new rugby jersey, or it doesn't matter what it is. And so the kids go to their parents, can I get the new one? Even though the old one's fine. We've had a massive plethora of people ripping off garments around the world. You know the score. Everywhere you go, you can get fake messy top. this thing has led to this kind of fast fashion now being part of sport as well. So before we talk about exactly what you're doing in terms of trying to sort that problem, you've been in sports sponsorship. You know the score. Giveaways, change it every year. New sponsors, new logo, new jersey, new material, more resources being used. Has sport really not kept its eye on the ball on that front? Because I don't think it has.
It hasn't in the slightest. I think, and it's not just the kit; it's everything that go. Every club will have training kits. They'll have warm-up
Yeah,
shirts. They'll have the stuff their under 21s are wearing. That
yeah,
you look at if you're looking at a top-level football club, you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of units of apparel every year. So yeah, it is kind of sports' dirty little secret. It's how we describe it at Reflow. That no one's really talking about it still,
yeah. Because
because none of.
fashion, yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but fashion gets and it deservedly has been given a real hard time about the fast fashion, the sweat factories, and all that. But they're still making the same things for the sports industry. It seems to have got away with it a bit.
Yeah, and it is the epitome of fast fashion because it's got a shelf life and then it's got, they can't sell it anymore, and then you're left with, and then everyone's encouraged to get the next version, and what happens to that stuff, I think, is the question you've got to ask, and no one is asking, and I'll always ask the question. And when we talk about fashion, it's the same with fashion, is when was the last time you recycled a piece of clothing?
Yeah,
And most people will say, well, I don't think I ever have. And it's because clothing isn't designed to be recycled. So you've got lots of things like the water industry where people are hammering the people making, well, the drinks industry in general, the beverage industry, lots of single-use plastic being created, but it's created to be recycled. So it has a
yeah,
story. But
absolutely.
fashion has kind of managed to slide through that, and sport is a big, huge part of that. I mean, 92 million tons of fabric end up in landfill every year, but all of that never really gets talked about. People will
No.
concentrate on the plastic bottle, but the plastic bottle should be a closed loop system. It's designed to be recycled. And it is recyclable. There is a route to recycle those, whereas most of the time there isn't a route to even recycle clothes if you wanted to.
When you look at where sport has gone, and you mentioned TV there, and that is, a blessing, like you said, we can see lots of different, and it's also a curse because what it does is people see their heroes. I want that shirt. All right, I want that top. And then the very next season, like we said, they've changed again. Trainers. I mean, I can't imagine the amount of material that goes into trainers and then fake trainers. All of this seems to have just got bigger and bigger with social media, with all the promotion. And again, you watch stuff and you'll see, I don't know, hey, you can't blame the stars. They're getting paid to say this stuff, but they're just saying buy this, consumerism. Sport has a problem with consumerism, doesn't it?
It does certainly, yeah, and I think it needs to quickly address and look at what's happening there. And I think the big thing that I always look at is that there's the commercial proposition of a sports team, and so their solutions, and in a race to the top where the bottom line really matters because that
Yeah,
affects the quality of player you can buy and therefore where you'll finish in the league, and it's like compounding, is that the solutions to these things need to be found in a commercial way, right? And I've heard lots of people say in the past, well, football clubs should only produce one kit and wear it for 3 seasons,
yeah,
but then they're removing a huge amount of commercial revenue. That's not realistic. That's realistically not going to happen. Another thing that people say is, well, should sponsor logos be able to peel off so you can put a new sponsor logo on? But you just need to look at what happens when a sponsor logo does fall off on telly. It looks terrible. Like no one wants that. And if they're
yeah,
designed to come off, then they're going to fall off easier. So there's been lots of talk, and when I was involved in the sports industry, and one of the things that led us to some of the stuff we're doing at Reflow is like you hear lots of people talking about fixes, but they are all commercially damaging.
yeah.
And you can't expect any organization
No,
in the world, be it a sports organization or to damage their bottom line
no.
because they're simply not going to do it. Like that's
Yeah,
the reality of it, unless their hand is forced. But no one's going to force their hand on that issue. I don't think. I think people are more likely, if you look at some of the issues that are in sport of like betting logos on the front of shirts and kids are watching it, then that's a bigger issue than people are talking about that, and that's something that's changing from next year. You can't have a betting sponsor on the front of a football jersey, but no one's talking about the sustainability piece because I think it is less in the highlight. So the clubs aren't going to change what they're doing unless they're forced to, or they're given something which is commercially viable that's not going to lose them revenue and is something they can roll out at scale without sacrificing. and that's fair enough, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think a couple of things. I want to talk about how you got the idea of Reflo in a moment, but just before I do that, one of the things that has interested me is how sport is envisioned. All right, so around sustainability. So the World Cup in Qatar, lots of negative publicity. It's an oil state, all of that, and flyover, and yet no one's giving a damn about flying over to America and Canada for the World Cup coming up. You have Formula One, which gets slammed for all the fumes and all that, but no one talks about the America's Cup or how much plastic goes into kind of laying tracks and things like that. So again, we seem to pick and choose the sports we criticize for their sustainability, don't we?
Yeah, and I think there's so much politics involved with sport now that
Yeah,
you're, when you're overlaying politics into anything, people will always be, and there's so much money involved, right? That actually probably some of what the criticism you're hearing is lobbying from other people who think they're under threat. So, yeah, I completely agree. I think it's the same with anything. You've got to be really conscious of what you're reading and where you're reading it to understand why there's certain things being said. And yeah, I fundamentally believe that sport can have the power for good, but as soon as you chuck politics into it and you chuck the huge amounts of money into it, that's where the issues start coming. The sport isn't the issue; it's the narratives that are spread for people's own agenda. And it's probably a whole other podcast, maybe a
yeah, it
whole other
is.
book. There's a whole other that you could pin on that.
So where did you get to start Reflow? Because clearly you must have had. It sounds like it's corny, a Jerry Maguire moment, right? You must have had one of those. So you're in this industry, you're jetting around, you're doing all that stuff. Why do you suddenly think, "Hey, I want to create a sustainable, sports brand"?
Yes, the really short version of it is myself and my best friend Pete, who's my business partner. Known each other since we were kids, always quite entrepreneurial by nature. Um, Through our own day jobs, through the things that we were doing, two moments kind of appeared, two Genesis moments, and they came
Yeah.
together and created Reflow. So those were he was working for a company that made drinking water, and it was having a juxtaposition. The better am I doing at my job, the more single-use plastic gets created. They had an issue where there was a problem with a 3 container loads worth of plastic bottles. And he asked, well, what can we do with them? And he was told, well, incinerate them or throw them into landfill. And he thought, well, there
Ooh,
must be something better to do that. So he went on a mission to find a better solution. And part of that, he found a company who said, yeah, we'll take all of that plastic. He said, well, what are you going to do with it? And they said, well, we're going to recycle it and turn it into fabric. And he went, oh, okay,
ah,
that's quite interesting. At the same time, I was building another sports startup called the Icon Series with a guy called Tom Brooks, CEO there. And without going into detail of what huge amounts of detail of what that is, I knew through the Icon series there could be an opportunity to create a golfwear brand that we could put on the back of some of the biggest athletes in the world pretty
right.
quickly. And so I was thinking about making a golfwear brand. Pete had found a company that could turn waste plastic into fabric, and he mentioned that to me. I mentioned what I was thinking, and that was the initial spark moment. And Pete doesn't really like golf, so he said, "Well, I know he
I'm
likes
with
going to the
Pete.
gym, as plenty are." And he's like, "Well, can we make?" He's in the gym 7 days a week. The joke is I'm on the golf course 7 days a week, which I wish were true. He is in the gym 7 days a week. So, well, can we make training wear as well? So we were like,
Right.
okay, let's just dial our passions. We're both passionate about sustainability. I'm passionate about golf. He's passionate about training. Let's put it together and create a business that is driven by those things. And the final
So
part of that is that we
yeah,
quickly realized we didn't know we weren't apparel guys. So we
yeah,
spent two years digging into what the problem was and
right.
realizing quickly that just using recycled fabrics isn't enough, and that we need to pare back everything that happens in the industry, which is negative, from packaging, dyeing techniques, cutting techniques, distribution, and do it in the most sustainable way we can, and try and make every change that we can to make it more sustainable. And that's what we kind of set out with our mindset of how can we take all these decisions and make everything a more sustainable option. And that's where Reflow was born.
And then, so what is your, let's take a football top, right? For example,
Mhm.
what would it be made of? So, there are certain things out there now. There are trainers that are made from old trainers. There's things like that.
Mhm.
Let's just talk about a football jersey you make.
Yeah.
How much of it is recycled? Where's it come from? And give me the journey of that thing in terms of how you cut its carbon footprint.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk. We haven't announced who our two football teams for next season are, but our jersey next year will be 100% recycled. So it'll be made from 100% recycled waste. The big innovation in our football jersey is it will be the first 100% recyclable jersey as well, meaning post-season we can take
Yeah.
it back and recycle it again back into a
But
pellet of
you
recycled
would do
polyester.
that, or the
Yeah,
consumer would have to. You'd get the
the
consumer
consumer would
back
send
to
it
you.
back to us. Consumer would send. So there's two elements of it. The consumer can scan a QR code in the back neck and send it to us, and we'll take it and recycle it. And physically, that will happen. It's not one of these things. Yeah, yeah, it's recyclable, and then no one knows how to recycle it. That will physically happen as a process. But also the club, all of the unused kit, all of the old kit, well, en masse, send that back to us, which will also be recycled. Something we've rolled out in Formula E this season with Nissan and Jaguar. So 60% of Nissan and Jaguar's kit for this season is fiber to fiber recyclable, meaning that post season they give it back to us. We take it and recycle it back into pellets of recycled polyester, which you can then start that process again with. So we call that reloop technology, and that's our biggest innovation. But all of these things are also made out of recycled waste to start with. So any reloop product is 100% recycled polyester and 100% recyclable. So yeah, it's a closed loop system and something that just hasn't been done in the sports industry before.
Now, polyester is the old stretchy stuff that we use, and lycra, I think, has got a bit of it or whatever. It all comes from hydrocarbons, right? So let's
Yeah,
get to the point. People might say, well, why aren't you making things out of cotton, which is natural, right? And recycle that. You're already part of the kind of hydrocarbon chain. So how do you answer critics like that? Because I get the
yeah.
limitation is these materials are the things that athletes need, don't they?
Yeah, so we're not using virgin polyesters. We're taking waste and turning it into new. So we're not plugging into the world of hydrocarbons and turning oil into and refining that into
Yeah.
we're taking recycled waste and using that. Sometimes there is a small percentage of virgin polyester where there's a real performance need
Yeah.
in the product, but it's, probably max 20% of a product. But as I say, often our products are 100% recycled, and that will always be our aim. And I think we have looked at lots of other
Natural
fabrics
fibers.
to
Yeah.
natural fibers, yeah, like biofabric, like a cotton, for example.
Yeah.
A cotton just doesn't perform well enough to go on an elite athlete. It doesn't sweat wick, but also there's lots of cotton has its own issues, right? Cotton is so
Oh,
much more water
water. Yeah.
intensive than a recycled polyester. So we there is no golden bullet to create the best like zero impact solution. I mean, the only option there would probably be to paint something, or even be naked and paint something on yourself. But even that has an impact.
Spray clothing.
Yeah, spray clothing is natural, but in reality there is no
I
better
get it.
currently out there. So we need to have it perform to the highest level. So we can't sacrifice performance and we can't
I
sacrifice
understand.
commercials for the club. So we're offering football clubs or Formula E teams or Formula One teams or whoever something that doesn't sacrifice performance, doesn't sacrifice commercials, but is a hell of a lot more sustainable than the incumbent brands options out there. And that's kind of our sweet spot.
Can you take things that people are throwing away now? So I know that what you'll have is hopefully you'll have your jersey and then they send it back after a season or whatever. But are there things now, old football kits that are being thrown away now into landfill? Could you get any of those? Or do you have to go and get stuff that's already been kind of recycled into pellets? Do you know what I mean?
Unfortunately, we can't take. Oh, we have to. So you have to design things to be made to be recycled. So
Understood.
even if a garment is they may say, well, this is made out of polyester, so can you recycle it? You then need to look at what the thread's made out of, what the inks are, how the
Yeah.
logos are applied. If there's any silicone, most of them will use like certain glues to stick logos on. We have to use water-based glues that we developed to do it. So you really have to design, has to be part of the ethos of before you've even started creating it.
Yeah.
You need to work out how to recycle it. So again, it's this thing of when people say, when did you last recycle something? Well, I haven't. It's because that product isn't designed to be made recyclable. Then that's the issue. So,
Yeah.
we
It's got to
design
be
into that.
designed. Yeah, it's got to be
Yeah,
designed, hasn't it? And then, so
yeah.
this leads me on to this idea of circularity, which, I'm sure you're across it. Loads of
Mhm.
stories we do on Future Net Zero and Digital Live News are all about how do we do this? And they're looking at it for, bits of cars, they're looking at it for, appliances in your house, they're looking at it for clothing. Um, how far you're doing some great stuff, and I'm sure the other companies doing sort of similar things. How far before we start to design the things, hopefully in the next year or two, or maybe 5 years, so they're all built to be recycled? you see what I mean? So that the
Yeah,
trainer is built to be recycled, the jersey, the whatever hot pants, the swimming trunks, whatever it
yeah.
is. When do you think? Because it's great what you're doing, but obviously until the big boys start doing this, the big brands, they'll still be out there.
For sure. I mean, our hope is that as quickly as they discover how to do it or decide they want to do it, they probably could do it. We will be the size of them. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? I think the honest answer is that it's quite hard to unravel. Quite hard to go
Right.
backwards. And there's an impact in terms of your bottom line. And in a world for these big guys driven by shareholder value and boards saying you can't do this, you can't do that,
Yeah.
then they've got to unravel their entire process to then start again. We built the company with every single piece of knowledge that we knew and now can embed because it's built into our ecosystem. It's built into how the business works and operates. So for us to pick up something new in the world of sustainability and embed it into our process is actually quite simple because it's our DNA.
Yes. You
Whereas for
built
the
it.
big guys, if
Yeah.
they're trying but I always say they'll never get. I mean, they'll never get there. The likes of Nike and Adidas can never get towards being a sustainable brand. The same way, no matter how many salads McDonald's have on the menu, they'll
Yeah.
never be a health food store. They'll never
Yeah.
be, that's impossible. So I think what people are starting to see through is the greenwashing. Is that actually the big brands like to talk about it, look at all these great things we're doing, but it's maybe 0.5% of their entire business operation is that got that in mind,
And you've
and
landed. Yeah.
we hope the customer sees through that, and they're less and less able to do that because there's lots of new legislation coming around, like European legislation around greenwashing and product passports, and
Yeah.
there's I won't mention who they are for probably I don't want to get on
Yeah.
the
Let's not do
fear of
that.
litigation, but there is one of the biggest sports brands in the world 2 years ago. If you looked at all their marketing, they
Yeah.
were talking about sustainability, sustainability, sustainability. It was the key thing they talked about. And now they've stopped. And their argument, and I heard someone in their senior leadership team talk about it, is like, well, the customer expects it now, so we no longer talk about it.
Yeah.
That's not true. What actually happened is they had several class action lawsuits against them and false sustainability claims that they lost. And therefore they've stopped talking about it because they can't legitimately talk about sustainability because it's not true. So that's
Where do you, yeah, I get where you're coming from. Where do you sit on the thing? Because, I don't know if you've noticed, there was a story, just good investigation by the BBC about tires, right? And tires that we recycle here in this country, and then literally they're being burned in India, right? And there's all the stories of, electronics that end up on a beach in the middle of Southeast Asia. How do you ensure, a couple of quick questions before we end. So, how much of your process is the UK based? So you can do that. And how much can you actually verify, hey, I've got this from recycled material, I've made this, and I will recycle it? Because you nailed it there. In the world of greenwashing, I, as a consumer, if I'm going to buy your product, I want to trust you, don't I?
Mhm. Yeah, for sure, and it's a very valid point. And we've heard horror stories of you know a uh, of companies creating brand new plastic bottles, then recycling them to then say, well, look, here's our recycled range, and it's like, well, the bottle's never been used.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're super stringent on kind of up chain, if you like. It's not we aren't the recycler, but
Right.
we are super stringent on auditing, so making sure that we're fully auditing up the food chain as far as we can go to making sure that we are doing what we say we're doing. We do our factories, we don't know, we don't tell them, but they probably know now. But we have all of our fabrics are GRS stand, which is Global Recycled Standard certificated. Um,
Right.
they all are Okotex 100 certified, which means that they have to adhere to certain treatments and they can't use harmful chemicals and things like that. And all
But
of that is
is it,
tested independently.
yeah,
And
is
then
it here,
we
Rory, or is it all abroad? Because that would be another
uh,
question.
Yeah, Far East, best recyclers are in the world. There
Right.
isn't the infrastructure in the UK to recycle and produce sportswear at the scale that you'd need to. It doesn't exist. That's not
Right.
something that would
So,
happen.
so you would have a carbon footprint of bringing the stuff in, which I assume you're accounting for.
Exactly. And actually shipping, if you're using sea freight, is, less than 10% of the carbon emissions of a product. If you air freight, it's over 40%. So we'll always look to sea freight and we offset as well. But offset is not the solution, it's
Right.
reduction is the solution.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then we kind of like we independently audit. So we will do spot tests with Intertek, who are the world's best testing house for fabrics, to then take it off cuts and go, right, this is actually what that contains,
How
and this
much
is
does it
actually what that
contain?
is.
Yeah.
Is it what it says it is? And yeah, that's super important to us. We once found a beautiful fabric from another brand. Again, I won't mention they are, and none of us could get our heads around how it was recycled fabric. It just sometimes there are certain things you just can't do, and we sent it to mills, they couldn't do it, so we sent it to our Intertech, a fabric testing house, and they said, "We'll tell you how they've made it feel like that because it's got 0% recycled content in it." You're
Mm.
like, right, okay, and they're things that we hang our hats on what we're doing. We can't afford to not be walking the walk as well as
I
talking
was
the
going to
talk.
say, yeah. Otherwise, they'll be there. What are you doing in terms of cutting your footprint?
Um, everything that we do, we look at the most minimal footprint that we can. So be that shipping, be that sourcing of our packaging, and be that even our production, keeping our production as vertical as possible. So, we would never create an Italian fabric and ship it to China to then be produced. So it's almost like for us, it's every side of the business we look at of how we
Mm.
can reduce and monitor. So that's the key thing, is looking at what we're doing, looking at where the impacts are, and then making the reductions wherever we can. We also do things like we're a fully remote team. We're 40 people now, but we don't need an office. We don't need a warehouse. We want to reduce the impact we have as a business as much as possible. So that's using third-party logistics rather than our own standalone warehouse, which half of it might be empty. That's not having an
Yeah, yeah.
office and heating of the office and people commuting into the office every day and all of those things. For us, these are it's kind of every decision we make is how do we have the least impact as a business we can.
What do sports people think of you? Are you seen as just weirdos that are doing this? Or when you go and have those, big sports conferences, we have them in every industry, you go,
Yeah.
hi, this is what I'm doing. Or maybe old friends, colleagues in the sports marketing world that you were in. What's the reaction to it? Do they see you as a kind of like, green Jesus that's doing his bit?
Uh, probably not a green Jesus, but I think at first everyone thought we were slightly mad. But actually, the support we've had from old colleagues, from people in the industry, from general people across the sports industry has been incredible. Um, if you just look at some of the projects that we've worked on in our first 6 months, we worked on the Australian Open Tennis and the WM Phoenix Open Golf, who both contacted us through the contact us section on their website. There's an appetite for
So that's what I
better
was trying to get to. Yeah.
options.
So
Yeah,
people do. It's not just lip service, like we just said. There are people genuinely trying to make a difference. Yeah.
there are absolutely, but I think the key thing is that for us, we're a turnkey solution that isn't any different than them doing what they're doing before. So we're making their life easy, and we're giving them headlines to be able to talk about. So we're lucky that, the Australian Open Tennis and the WM Phoenix Open and the two football clubs that we're working with all have a genuine desire to
Yeah.
want to do better, and we find that is across the board. But you've got to be realistic that there is a genuine desire to want to do better. But if what we do costs 50% more than the incumbent, then it's
Of
probably
course.
not going to be rolled out. So it's this kind of like, because I come from a commercial world in sport, I understand that we need to be commercial. But we're also, we're brand marketeers as well. So we're creating things that they're able to tell stories about, they're able to get people to simply understand and get on board with. It's better for the environment, and it doesn't cost them. They're not sacrificing anything from
Yeah.
performance or commercial. So that's kind of the sweet spot that we found.
My last point. We've all seen it. Doesn't matter where you go in the world. For some reason, Manchester United shirt pops up. This is probably a Man City shirt. But there are loads of kids in sub-Saharan Africa. There's kids in Asia, and those football kits, those fake kits, end up there. Um, I think what you're doing is very admirable, and it's great for the elites and everything like that. What will you try and do to make sure that your stuff has a messaging that will start to get to that level? Because that's when we see real change. When the kids aren't wearing these things that are just toxic for the earth.
For sure. And by the way, I also, before we ever recycle a football jersey, it should have lived its ultimate life, right? It should have
Yeah.
been worn hundreds of times. It should, we would rarely encourage someone just because it's the
A
end of the
season out.
season, a
Yeah.
season out, to go and buy the new shirt and just recycle the new one. We say, actually, that shirt's got plenty of life left in it. Donate it to, a charity shop. Donate it to
Yeah.
wherever it should get worn. I definitely think the world of fake and this kind of,
Yeah.
I don't know how that is fixable, to be honest, just
No.
right now. I think though half of those shirts will never see
They'll end up
they
somewhere
exist.
in the soil. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I think in general there has to be a bigger awareness about fabric recycling and garment recycling. And I think that's coming down the line. It has to. The same way people now know to recycle a plastic bottle, that people need to understand that they should have options to do that with clothing. They can't right now. But if you go and speak to a 12, 13-year-old now, and if Pete, my business partner's got a 10-year-old and a 4-year-old, and the first thing that they'll do, if I went and threw a plastic bottle in a normal bin when we were out and about, they'd be like, "What are you doing? Stop!
What are you
Like,
doing?"
that doesn't go in that
Exactly. Yeah.
bin." And that's built into their subconscious because it's something they've grown up with. And we have to make fabric and clothing recycling part of the norm. It should be what people expect to do. And clothing has to be built in that way, and there has to be therefore the back end infrastructure to recycle it come. And it's miles behind anywhere else. But us hoping we're pushing the needle and changing that, we hope that I don't mind if the big guys decide to make recyclable clothing because we'll have moved on by then. We're innovators. We're already thinking of what's next. But it's better for the environment. We're not doing this to gatekeep it. We're doing this to make a genuine change. And we're not going to say no one else can make a recyclable football jersey. If they can, then good on them, because it's a positive. In fact, we've got a meeting with the Football League next week to talk about how they make the names and numbers on the back of the shirt recyclable, because they aren't currently. So it's all well and good our shirt being recyclable, but if there's names and numbers they stick on the back make it you can't recycle the shirt, then it's pointless. So we're saying to them, here's how you do it. And by the way, you don't have to do it through us. We're just going to tell you how to do it because it's the right thing to do.
All right, do my team, Leighton Orient. Big shout out to the O's. I want them in a recycled jersey soon, mate. All right.
Oh, mate, we'd love to, especially with the Harry Kane link. That makes a load of sense.
Listen, I think it's very clever. I think it's bright. You're a kind of bright young man, which is brilliant, and it's a good story. Which I think it's one of those things that if people just listening, watching, have a think. I've got loads of football shirts that I still wear. They still get used, but you're right. There's a pattern to all of that. Rory, thank you for joining me on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
No worries. Thanks so much.
No, my pleasure. Thanks very much, audience. Hope you enjoyed that podcast. Tell us what you think about the idea of recycled sports gear. I think it's the future, and I think it's a good thing that Rory and his team at Reflo are doing. Get in touch on social media. You know the usual things. My thanks to Rob for production on this week's episode of the Net Hero Podcast.
You've just heard the Net Hero Podcast from FutureNetZero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. FutureNetZero.com. Better business, better planet.